you cut your teeth doing horror for a number of years. Very successful, at least in terms of the people that definitely saw it. People who definitely saw Horrible Way to Die and You're Next and the VHS films obviously are very familiar with your work. In making a shift from horror to more thriller, was that a conscious decision to say, we don't have anything left to prove in horror, or just we want a new challenge, or we're bored?
No, it was more like, after we finished Your Next and, we sold at the Lionsgate and stuff, it felt like we had finally gotten to a new point in our careers where we could choose our projects more or less based on the type of film we wanted to make, not the type of film that we could get made. With like Your Next, it was always about, like being able to pitch a movie that made sense to, people with money. It was like, it's a home invasion film with a horrible way to die. It was a serial killer movie, so these little subgenres helped us be able to make those movies, period, because before that we didn't have anything to show for it, so, we had to sell it on the basis of it was kind of a no-brainer, And after Your Next, we ended up in this position where we could be a little bit more choosy with our projects, and so, Simon and I initially thought, maybe we would try our hand at doing like an action film, because we were getting kind of sick of doing horror films over and over again, and really, at the end of the day, I think the reason we became filmmakers in the first place was because more of action movies in some ways than even horror films. The first conversation we had was about like John Woo and The Killer and stuff. So that's kind of how we first bonded. So we thought maybe we would try our hand at that, and we pursued an action film for a little while, and it didn't really come together. It was almost too straightforward. We were almost too pragmatic in our thinking. And so for whatever reason, it didn't come to fruition. And at a certain point, I was reading this book, Shock Value, by Jason Zinnemann, I think is his name. And in Shock Value, it's a really interesting deconstruction of late 70s, early 80s horror and that kind of turning point era. And it just got me excited about horror again. And but I still knew that we didn't want to just like jump into another horror film. But what we kind of decided on was more or less a movie that kind of summarized our interest in genre films in general, and kind of summarized the nostalgia that inspired us to want to be filmmakers to begin with.
Well, are there thrillers that kind of influenced your approach to this film? I know you said you don't like to borrow from films that you like, because then you feel you're either parodying them or copying them. Were there films that you looked at that you said, this is exactly what we don't want to do, and use that as kind of a way to catapult yourself to something and say, well, now we've learned everything we don't want to do, everything we want this film to not be, and then move from there?
Yeah, for sure, but I mean, none of those would be, I think, super obvious to anyone watching The Guest, because they're so radically different. It was more about like looking at films like Stop Loss or In the Valley of Allah that were like very political and dealing with kind of like oddly similar subject matter, but in a completely different way, and kind of trying to figure out like, what those films did that like didn't connect with people, But again, no one, I don't think, would compare our film to those movies at all. They're radically different genres,
Could this film possibly work if it wasn't centered around a military family? Because here you have, here they are so desperate to kind of pour their heart out. It's like you're almost therapy for them. When you first are there, they want to tell you all their problems. They're sitting around, they're having drinks with you, they're telling you everything that they're feeling, and as a result, it feeds into the comfort level of the lead here. Do you think that helps put an interest, that spin helps people accept it a little easier than if it was just a stranger showing up at a house where the rules would be completely different? You'd be like, there's no way they would just let some random guy into the house. But the military thing, I think there's that bond that allows them to accept it a little bit easier.
I guess it's a convenient device for the family, to be emotionally available and open, and it gets us into the story very quickly. I don't know if there was ever an iteration of the script where it wasn't a military family.
No, it was always a military family, yeah. But I don't know. I mean, a family in mourning is it's just kind of figuring out exactly like what that like language should be, to show that the family is like missing something that your character can fill.
Mm-hmm. And You know, like I guess like the subgenre really at the end of the day that we're playing with is kind of like the strange visitor subgenre of movies like Stepfather and Shadow of a Doubt and things like that. And you know, those have like different reasons for things, you know, to be happening. But I think that it's like you said, you know, the vulnerability aspect's important to, you know, kind of getting us into the story. You know?
How difficult is it to find the right balance in writing the character and directing the character and being the character to not go too far in one direction or the other? Because it could easily throw the balance of the movie off if he's too creepy. And you know, if you're too creepy, then you're like, well, you're constantly waiting for bad things to happen. But
Right.
if he's too nice, when bad things start to happen, it completely doesn't fit in with the tone of the film. So how, when you're constructing this?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we you know, we always played it kind of from, you know, the likable angle, really.
Yeah,
you know?
there was kind of like a charm dial, and I feel like I don't remember too clearly, but I feel like there was some takes, you know, where we would do a sort of a creepier take, and then one that was, you know, more, you know, charming. I guess.
I remember like early on, like the biggest transitional period was just kind of dialing in how almost robotic we wanted you to be, you know, like because of, you know, there's a certain element to his character that has to do with, you know, kind of like super soldier-ish type of stuff, you know, and you know, so it was always like, you know, trying to see how far to go with that, and you know, because we didn't want it to play in this, you know, because there's other movies that's done similar types of things to this, you know, like the movie Stoker, for instance. I felt like that I couldn't really get into the you know, the character himself, you know, the stranger that visits in that film, because there just wasn't any humanity to him, so I was never, yeah. So, I mean, and a lot of people like that movie, and that's fine. I like that director's other films, but, you know, like, it was just one of those things where that actually was a big eye-opener watching that film before ours, because it came out not too long before we started production, and, you know, so to me, it was always like erring on the side of, you know, let's just make this guy real, and let's get the audience to just enjoy him, really. I mean, like, it wasn't even a matter of like, you know, is he likable or not? It was always like, this, you know, it's a performance, it's a character that's meant to be enjoyed and have fun with. Really.
Yeah, and winning over each individual member of the family, and Anna being the most difficult, but kind of, you know, once those were achieved, then, you know, he had his place in the family, and I think it was also kind of building up to the you know, batshit crazy ending.
Because he's multifaceted, does that make it, I think, easier for the audience to engage with the character? Because when you're watching him, you know, he goes through different periods, obviously. I mean, he's very charming, he's very gentlemanly, but then he's also very violent, but he's being violent towards bad people. So you find yourself rooting for him at the same time that you're also saying bad things are definitely coming. Do you think that complexity then?
Well, that was the fun of the whole thing, really. It was always like trying to create a conflict in the audience whenever they're watching the film, and have them constantly be questioning, like, you know, am I for this guy or against him? And I think ultimately, even whenever, you know, things get nastier in the film, I think you just can't help but enjoy the stuff that Dan's doing. And we had a lot of fun, you know, playing up, like, you know, because as the film goes, I think the movie, you know, it starts more as a drama, becomes a little bit more comedic, and then by the end of it, it's more of a full-on action kind of genre, kind of deconstruction type of situation. And I think, you know, by the end, we ended up ramping up a little bit more of that genre stuff. And I remember by the end of it, remember when we were in the haunted maze, I remember we kind of had like this shorthand where once we felt like we kind of had the performance, you know, where we wanted it, in the scene where we wanted it, really, Dan usually was always on it right away. But it was more like, you know, getting all the pieces in place. Then we kind of were like, well, let's do the Shining take, you know. You remember that? And it was like, and that was like our shorthand for like, you know, Dan, just like go as far out as you want, you know. And
but I think the questioning thing is interesting, because if the audience are not sure how they feel about this character, if they're constantly questioning, it means they're engaged, and that's a great thing to have an audience right with. If they know how they feel about this guy from the first scene, then, you know, the game is up. But actually, to constantly question what you're watching is, you know, it's a great way to engage with a movie.
All right, thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.